When working with ES6 modules, there are different ways in which we can import and export things from or to a file. And in this lecture, let's quickly learn about them and understand how we can import and export in different ways. Let's go to VS Code. So in here, we are importing this create user function and this get user function from this file. And this is called as named imports because here we are importing the functions using their name from this file. So with this same name, we have functions in this user action.ts file, right? So here what we are doing is we are importing this create user and get users from this user action.ts file. And from this file also, we are only exporting create user and get users. So instead of specifying them separately, what we can do is, since we want to import everything which this user action.ts file is exporting, we can use star here. So we can say import star from this file. And what this user action.ts file is exporting, it is exporting create user and get users function. So in this file, we want to export both of them. So we are using star here. And then we need to provide an alias. So here let's simply say action. Okay, or actions we can say. So now from this user action.ts file, we are importing everything which this file is exporting and we are putting it in an alias and we are calling it actions. And now whenever we want to access a particular method or class or interface, we need to access it on this actions, on this alias. So here we can say action.createUser. You see that that error is gone. Here also we need to say action.createUser. And here where we want to access getUsers function, there we want to say actions.getUsers. So in this way, using this star and providing an alias for it, we can import everything from a file. And when I say everything, remember that everything which is being exported from that file, that will be imported. Things which are not being exported, that will not get imported here. For example, in this user actions, we are not exporting this user list. So that will not get imported at this line when we are using star. Only those functions, classes, interfaces, etc. will be imported here, which is being exported from that file. Hope this point is clear. And here we are using an alias, and we can also use alias for named imports. For example, here we are importing this user class from this file. So here also we can use this as keyword and provide an alias for it. For example, u. Now, when we are providing an alias, we cannot use the actual name. Then we will have to use the alias name. So here let me give a meaningful name so that it will make some sense. So let me call it as user with lowercase u. And now wherever we want to use this user class, there we will simply use its alias like this. If I save the changes, we don't have any error, the compilation is successful and we can see the result. So you can also provide alias using as keyword for named imports as well. Then let's talk about default export. So as I mentioned, these imports which we are doing, these are named imports. Okay, so here also it is a named import. But what we can also do is we can do a default export. Now, what do we mean by default export? So in this file, we are exporting this user class. Now from this file, we are simply exporting this user class. We don't have anything to export here. So what we can do is we can export it as default. Okay, and we can also export other things from here. For example, let me go ahead and let me export a constant. So I'll create a constant here. Let's call it pi equal 3.14 just for an example, and I can export it from here. Now this export will be named export, and to import named export, we specify the name which we want to export in the curly braces. I'll show you that with an example. But for the default exports, we don't need to import it using its actual name. So for example, we are using this user class in this user action.ts file. So there, now since this user class, we are exporting it as default, I can go ahead and I can import it from this file and I can provide any name to it. For example, I can call it as people. Okay, and whatever we are exporting default from here, from this file, from this user.ts file, that will be assigned to this people. So from this user.ts file, we are exporting this user class as default. So that will be assigned to this people. And always remember that from a file, we can only have one default export. We cannot have multiple default exports. Okay, so wherever we want to use that user class now, we will have to use this people, because inside this people variable only, we are storing this user class. We are importing it and we are storing it in this people variable. Okay, and if we want to import the named exports, then we will have to use the same approach. So we will have to use curly braces like this, and there we will specify what do we want to export. For example, pi. So this user.ts, it is also exporting this pi. So we are importing it here. So for the named exports, we are using curly braces, and inside that we specify what do we want to import. But for a default export, we don't need curly braces, and we can specify any name. The name should not be same as the default export. It can be any name, and the default export will be assigned to it. So this is called as default export. All right, if I save the changes, everything should be working as expected. Now, there is one more thing which I want to cover here, and that is currently in this user_action.ts file, we are importing the user class. So here we have this user class which we are exporting as default, and we are importing it here. And just to make things simple, let me call it as user itself so that we will know what we are importing. And here also let's replace it with user. Okay, and then in the app.ts file, we are importing this user_actions.ts file. Okay, now here also let's go ahead and let's import user. So for that, let's say import user class from this model slash user.js. Okay, now you might think that since both user_action.ts file and app.ts file is dependent on this user.ts file, this user.ts file will be downloaded twice and it will be executed twice. No, that is not the case. So the thing is, the code in the JavaScript file execute only once when the file is imported for the first time. If another file then imports the same file again, it does not run again. So for example, this app.ts file will be the first file to be executed. In that, we are importing this user.js file. Okay, and here we are also importing this user_action.js file. So you might think that this file will be downloaded and executed twice, but that is not the case. When the app.js file will run, browser will find that these two files are the dependencies for this app.ts file. It will download these two files and it will execute it. Then when the user_action.ts file will be executed, there also it will see that, okay, this user_action.ts file also has a dependency on this user.js file, but this file has already been downloaded once. So browser is not going to download it again, and it is not going to execute it again. Okay. So this is something you need to understand so that you can use ES6 modules in your application appropriately. And we can also validate this. So for example, if this file will be executed twice, in that case, let's write a console.log statement. And here, let's say user file executing or user.js file executing. So if this file is going to be executed multiple times based on how many times we are importing it, in that case, we should see this console.log message multiple times, right? But if I save the changes, you will see that console.log message only once because this file has been executed only once, even though we are importing it in app.ts and in user_action.ts. But that does not mean that it is going to execute this user.ts file twice or user.js file twice. It will only get downloaded and executed once, and that downloaded file will be used for all the inputs. All right, so this is all from this lecture, and this is all about modules. So in this section, we learned about how to use namespaces and how to use modules in our TypeScript application. If you have any questions, then feel free to ask it. Thank you for listening and have a great day.